The van slowed beside the bus stop like it belonged there. Two girls sat on the bench near Hermosa Beach, sunburned and tired, watching traffic roll past on the Pacific Coast Highway. The men inside spoke casually, as if they were just locals offering a lift. A question, an offer, a moment of hesitation, and then the sliding door shut. The sound was soft, almost ordinary. What followed was not. In 1979, Southern California was a place where teenagers moved through the day with a kind of freedom that felt normal at the time. Kids hitchhiked. They accepted rides from strangers when they were stranded. They trusted daylight and crowds to keep danger at a distance. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris built their hunt around that trust. Both had long criminal histories, and they met while incarcerated. After their release, they connected again and began driving the same corridors where teens waited for rides, watching who was alone, who looked unsure, who might believe a friendly offer. Investigators later concluded that before the murders began, the pair picked up numerous female hitchhikers without attacking them. Those encounters were practice runs, ways to test their approach, learn what girls would accept, and find places where no one would interrupt them. They located an isolated fire road in the San Gabriel Mountains, far from houses and far from help. It was a landscape of dusty turnouts and brush, where sound doesn't carry and a scream doesn't bring anyone running. On June 24, 1979, 16-year-old Lucinda Lynn Schaefer vanished after leaving a church youth group meeting in Redondo Beach. She had a home, a routine, and people who expected her back. Days later, her body was found in the mountains. At the time, police didn't yet have a single case file tying multiple disappearances together. They had a dead teenager and a community asking how someone could be taken from a familiar place and dumped so far away. On August 5th, 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall was last seen hitchhiking near Sunland Tujunga. She disappeared into the foothills and never came home. Her body has never been recovered, leaving her family with the torment of uncertainty. No location, no final answers, just a name that never stopped being searched. On September 3rd, Bittaker and Norris targeted two girls together, 15-year-old Jackie Doris Gilliam and 13-year-old Jacqueline Leah Lamp. The pair had been hitchhiking along the coast and were sitting at a bus stop when the men offered them a ride. Once inside, the girls realized the van was not staying near the beach. It turned inland toward the mountains. They protested. According to later testimony, one of them tried to open the door and was struck, and both were overpowered. Neither girl returned home. By October, disappearances had a rhythm. A girl would be last seen at a familiar place, then hours passed, then days, then a missing person report, and dread that hardened into something worse. On Halloween, October 31st, 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford was abducted. Evidence later recovered showed the men made an audio recording during the attack. Investigators would describe the tape as one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence they had ever encountered. It wasn't rumor. It was a physical object recovered by police, documenting a victim's suffering. The investigation did not begin with a single dramatic break. It began with scattered reports across different areas and different departments. Detectives compared notes, checked leads, and tried to separate runaways from abductions, accidents from murder. The case began to move when a surviving victim reported a rape committed by two men linked to Hermosa Beach. Her name was Robin Robeck. What happened to her was brutal, but her report gave police something they could work with: descriptions, a timeline, and the fact that two men were operating together. Around the same period, Norris reconnected with a former prison acquaintance named Joseph Jackson. Norris talked. He described killings and gave details that matched what investigators already knew about Ledford. Jackson reported what he'd been told to law enforcement. The tip didn't solve the case by itself, but it sharpened suspicion and focused attention on a man with the right geography, the right history, and the right kind of access. Hermosa Beach police put Norris under surveillance and observed him dealing marijuana, which gave them a practical path to an arrest. On November 20th, 1979, Norris was taken into custody for a parole violation. The same day, Bittaker was arrested and held on a parole violation as well. The charges that brought them in were not, at first, 5 murder counts. That is how many investigations finally crack. A smaller violation creates a lawful opening, and once the door is open, the evidence spills out. Searches followed quickly. In Bittaker's apartment, investigators found Polaroid photographs linked to missing girls. In the van, they found items and tools used to restrain and control victims. They also recovered the audio tape of a young woman in clear distress. For detectives, it was no longer a question of whether they had the right men. It was confirmation, and it meant the case would be proven with evidence, not just fear. Norris was questioned. At first, he denied involvement, but when confronted with what investigators had gathered, he began to confess. He tried to shift blame and minimize his role, but he provided information that helped authorities understand the scope of the crimes and the locations involved. Search efforts in the San Gabriel Mountains focused on the fire roads and pullouts the pair had used. The work became a grim mix of recovery and documentation, with detectives marking sites, photographing terrain, and building a record that could survive in court. Norris ultimately accepted a plea bargain and testified against Bittaker. The prosecution relied on physical evidence, recovered photographs and personal items, and Norris's testimony describing how they approached girls and what happened once the van door closed. Bittaker was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder, along with kidnapping and rape, and sentenced to death. Norris received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years, though he was never granted parole. The nickname Toolbox Killers came from the ordinary nature of what they used, but the ordinariness is part of what makes the case so hard to face. 2 men moved through a crowded region without drawing attention, using traffic, anonymity, and the willingness of teenagers to accept a ride. The infamous tape is still widely discussed because even experienced investigators have said it is too disturbing to play. But the larger truth is simpler and more painful. 5 girls were taken from everyday places, and their families were left with the kind of absence that never stops echoing. In 1981, the case reached trial, and the evidence was presented in plain, brutal terms. Jurors saw photographs taken to intimidate victims, heard testimony about the van and the mountain road, and learned that the tape had been played in court to demonstrate what the girls endured. Bittaker received a death sentence on March 24, 1981. Norris's deal, finalized the year before, kept him alive but locked away for the rest of his life. They believed they would never be caught. They were wrong. Evidence survived them. A victim reported what happened to her and gave police direction. A confidant heard too much and spoke up. And an investigation that began with missing posters ended with convictions that made the cruelty impossible to deny. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.